Today, we are once again talking about Jeff Wilson because he's come up with some comments that I think are a little strange and I think highlight once again how out of touch he is with the average and everyday collector within this space. And whilst we will be pointing the finger at him in this video in particular, the same messaging can go towards many of his counterparts, many of these other influencers within the space as well, because it's sort of normalizing some pretty bad behavior from some of these businesses. And I think we're sort of heading down a slippery slope. Now I'm going to, share my thoughts on what I mean by that in a second, but just bear with me in this one. It's been a week since I made a video. My son was born on Wednesday, so I'm very, tired and haven't had much sleep. So if I stuff up, you guys know why. Now, like I said, the comments we'll be specifically referring to are from Jeff himself, and it relates to his most recent cards on the table video on YouTube. Now, this video was brought to my attention via someone called BK Sports Cards on YouTube and Instagram. I'll tag him down below. I saw it on one of his stories earlier today, and it is an interesting one. I'll play it for you now, and then I'll share my thoughts exactly in a few minutes.
Yeah, the interest in the hobby definitely keeps increasing. And the cool thing is that new people getting back into the hobby today, they're having a good experience, a lot better experience than people who got in a couple of years ago were, because you're getting into a time today when prices are actually inching up on a lot of cards, or at least staying stable, yet it's a lot more affordable to get into it than it was a couple of years ago. So you get a more stable market, more affordable entry points. And then you got things like grading, where there's actually quick turnarounds, lower prices than prior. So the whole thing feels a little more accessible. It's probably helping retain people better, which then helps the overall hobby, collector base grow.
So as you sort of see there, Jeff is basically talking about the hobby being more accessible and basically better overall than it was a few years ago. And whilst I agree, if you were a new collector today versus 2 or 3 years ago, that holds true. But the other messaging you sort of had there around things being, more accessible, prices being better than what they were, prices starting to come up, you can get access to product better, grading turnaround times are also better than a couple of years ago. That's where I start, to question things. And if you look at the comments, many people sort of share the same sort of sentiment, because he's essentially using the pandemic, the boom that we saw over the last 2 to 3 years, as the yardstick. And this is something that many others are doing within this space as well. And that's where, things get concerning, in my opinion, because you guys might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is Jeff is one of these people that is a landing page for this hobby, like Sports Card Nonsense has referred to him as many times. So he's sort of at the forefront. There are others sort of sharing the same messaging. And now some people are doing this because they're ignorant. Some people are doing this because they're aligned to companies and they want to keep the bread coming in. But they're sort of supporting this kind of behavior that we've sort of seen. And it's normalized the poor service offerings we're getting from these businesses. And when you're using the yardstick of 2 to 3 years ago, that's not a good position to be in, because 2 to 3 years prior to that, when things were a bit more normal, the prices from today to then are still ridiculous. It's still really difficult for people to participate within this hobby, especially when it comes to busting product and all that kind of stuff. Yes, we've had a lot of new money come in, and these people have invested money into the industry, like Michael Rubin and Fanatics, and that creates benefits at a high level. But when you've got people sort of, using the yardstick of 2 or 3 years ago, that sort of then gives those businesses, those people that have come in and spent all this money, justification for continuing to give us poor offerings as customers. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if people are sort of saying, well, it's okay, it's not as bad as it was 2 or 3 years ago, it's okay, it's getting better. It's like, well, no, because 2 or 3 years ago was a shit show. That was unacceptable, the stuff that we had to go through when it came to, service and value we were getting, right? The products and all that kind of stuff. Print runs, ridiculous. You have Tops come in and talk about wanting to, reduce print runs. They all of a sudden increase print runs. They come in and saying they want to reduce parallels. They bring in more parallels. They come in and say they want to get rid of redemptions. They bring in more redemptions. So it's all this behavior that's sort of being validated and normalized by these people at the front that are maybe not speaking truly on behalf of the people that are sort of, the average collectors, the everyday collectors. And that's why I think Jeff is a little bit out of touch. And some of these other people are a little bit out of touch too, because so many of the people at the forefront, and yes, it is only social media, but the trickle-down effect is seen across the board when it comes to local card stores and all this kind of stuff, is that these guys are basically praising these companies for the current situation because it's not as bad as it was 2 or 3 years ago. And I find that messaging to be insane. And I want to hear what you guys have to say down below, because that sort of gives a lot more wiggle room to these companies to sort of rip us off or take advantage of us. And that's not meant to be me downplaying what these companies are doing, because I think it's fantastic that we've had so much more money come into this industry, because we get value off the back of it, right? Or technically we should be getting value off the back of it, whether it be through new parallels or cooler game use relics and all these kind of stuff, right? Cool stuff that collectors actually want. That's the sort of benefit you get from all this money coming in, from making it a bit more mainstream, because then it becomes a bit more tangible and you're going to have more competition and all that kind of stuff. But like what we've seen, like I referenced to Tops a little bit earlier, you've had this company come in and sort of wiggle room off the back of Panini's poor efforts, and they're saying, well, Panini did really bad, so we're going to do bad too. But it's only, slightly, better, or maybe it's not as bad as what Panini were doing, but we're sort of okay because it's not as bad as Panini. It's like, where's the value coming from? Like, where are these people being held accountable? And if all these people are sort of aligned in some capacity, or getting paid in some capacity, or want to get paid in some capacity, or they want to sit at the table with all the other top dogs, are you actually going to get people speaking on behalf of us? Who's looking out for the average and everyday collector? There's not many people out there that are sort of doing that. When you see some of these mistakes that Tops have made, it becomes crystal clear, who's in their back pocket and who isn't, or who doesn't want to rock the boat. And that's where, in my opinion, things get concerning. And this is not new. We've talked to this many times on the channel before, but the general theme, like I said, is you got people like Jeff coming out and saying, well, it's not as bad. Now, to Jeff's credit, maybe he was referencing only new people, but he's talked to that many times before, referencing the wider hobby. Like, just because things are better now than they were a few years ago does not mean it's good. And we have a lot of room to grow. And my concern is that's where things are going to stop. They're going to use that as the yardstick, when they use that as the measuring stick, and say, well, it's not as bad as it was during then, because at least we get access to stuff now. But the prices of cards these days are insane. It's ridiculous. You can't go ahead and buy a hobby box these days like you could 4 or 5 years ago. And maybe that's a sign of the times and all that kind of stuff. And when I say hobby box, I mean the stuff people actually want that is actually going to retain value, not the entry level stuff. And there's nothing wrong with entry level stuff, but you guys get, where I'm going with that statement. It's like, where is this sort of stuff happening? And some of you guys might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, I'm sure 99.99% of you guys can think back to a time when you were a kid and most of the fun you had collecting cards was ripping packs yourself. It's like, is that stuff actually accessible these days? And I don't think it is. And if kids these days are not getting those opportunities because of this wider sentiment that we're seeing, people at the higher level saying, well, things are better now, where you can sort of justify the prices being where they're at, things are great, money's coming in, it's fantastic. It's like, well, if they're not getting that opportunity because of that, what does that mean for the long-term health of this hobby? Now, am I thinking too much to one side on that piece? Perhaps, because maybe kids don't want to rip packs. But when I sit back and think about all the fun I've had in the hobby and all the memories that I have as a kid that were pivotal, were a foundation for me to want to keep collecting as an adult, it's those things, right? It's ripping packs, it's having fun with your parents or your mates or something along those lines. But that sort of isn't there anymore because pricing is too insane. You've got these companies still charging ridiculous prices for grading, slow turnaround times. Jeff says it's better than it was a few years ago, and he's not the only one that I'm sort of picking on here, because there are others, Mojo Sports, Card Collector 2, many, many others in this space, sort of praising what we're getting, but what we're getting isn't good enough. And that's where my concern is. So, I want you guys to unpack down below. I know Sports Card Nonsense, who I referenced earlier, had a bit of a debate with Cage Lawyer, not a debate, just a back and forth on current trends within this industry, because Sports Card Nonsense is very much in the pocket of Fanatics and Tops. They are aligned to them, and that's okay. And they have held Tops accountable with some things, but even some of the statements from Mike, as an example, if you go back and watch it on his Instagram when Cage was talking to him, is very much with the blinkers on. And, if that becomes a wider thing where you got more and more people at the forefront, right? The landing pages, the people that are actually of influence within this space saying everything's okay, who's sort of speaking up for the little guy? And yes, you can say the little guy can speak with their wallet, but I don't think they're currently doing that, right? I don't think they're currently spending money on product and all this kind of stuff. So the hobby's gone from being something for them to now being something else. And that's okay, because we want more people involved and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, what is that something else going to turn into in 5-10 years time? Like, is card collecting going to be what we've known it to be in 5 to 10 years time? I don't know. And is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. But the way things are going, I don't think it's a good thing. And that's just my opinion. So I'm keen to hear what you guys have to say. Like I said, I've said that a few times now, but it's just a spicy one that you've got people continually at the forefront being out of touch with what's happening. And that is either down to ignorance or the fact they're getting paid by somebody to sort of save face and all that kind of stuff. And that's where things get a bit spicy, in my opinion. Like, we saw that from the collectibles guru many times, right? Where he was constantly talking up Tops, constantly talking down Panini, and then lo and behold, he gets hired by Tops to be their social media manager. And it's like, well, who's watching the watchers kind of thing. So it is what it is. Just want to share those thoughts. Let me know down below. Let me know what you think about the current state, whether you agree with what Jeff is saying, because yes, for new people, it makes sense. But, if you're saying the hobby is better now overall because it's better than it was 2 or 3 years ago, that's not good enough, in my opinion. You need to look a little bit further beyond that, because there's still a lot of things these companies could be doing to make better value for us as collectors. So, it is what it is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.